Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. We're so happy that you're joining us today as we continue to talk about different topics. My name is Father Daniele, and joining me, as always, is Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milliken. Welcome to you guys, and let's just move right into it because it's been a tough week for our country. It's been a tough week for a lot of people around Canada and maybe the world who's hearing the news that we heard. And so I think it's important that we just dive right in and try and just discuss what's been going on. And if I'm going to be honest, I mean, you guys know this, but our people listening today don't know that I didn't really even want to talk about this. Not that I didn't want to talk about it. No. But I didn't know if it was an appropriate time for us to talk about this subject.
We're three white dudes.
Yes,
all the thing.
Exactly.
We're not affected by this. I mean, we are, but we're not. We're affected in like a third degree form. Where we're Catholic, we're Canadian, and there's some awful things that have come to light.
Yes.
And that the Catholic name is tied to, and that's not necessarily. It's a hard topic. How do we three white guys talk about this? I don't think we can. I mean, we can. But I don't think we can with any form of how do we talk about. We can state facts. We can state facts and what's actually happening and bring truth to light as much as we can. And that's the only way we can kind of go about this subject. Because we don't have the ties to this awful part of Canadian history that other people would. And we tried to bring some people in to maybe talk about it, but it just wasn't.
We did try and have one of our sisters, who is a Catholic nun, and an Ojibwe woman come in and join us today to talk about this, but unavailable for today's taping. But we hope to have that conversation soon, so we can have more discussions on this topic. But I think what you're saying, as much as it's uncomfortable to talk about because we don't know what the right thing to say or we don't want to say the wrong thing either, it's important to talk about it because, strictly speaking from the scriptures, Jesus says, bring things to the light. And that's what's happened in the last week or two. Slowly in the history of Canada, I don't know if you guys remember growing up learning about residential schools in school. Mm-hmm. That really has only happened recently. Like so many people have said, I've only learned about the history of residential schools in recent times in education or whatever it might be. That in itself is sad. Mm-hmm. And slowly and surely sort of little glimmers of light are being exposed about the truth of residential schools over the past number of years. And then all of a sudden that was just blown right open in the last week or so with the news of Kamloops, former residential school. And it was hurt. It hurt to hear it. It hurt to see it. It hurt to see the reaction. It hurt. Everything hurt about it. But Jesus tells us when things come to the light, that's when we begin the healing process. And he warns us. He warns us himself. You think those things you're doing in the dark are going to stay there? I don't think so. No. All things come to the light. And I think as hard as it is to receive the news of what's happening or what has happened and what is happening, really, being exposed to the light is where we can confront the evil of the past and maybe what's going on in the present and reconcile, heal, and move to a better future.
I agree 100%. I think learning what we can from the horribleness that has happened. I mean, we do that in all of our life, with sin and whatnot. The best way to go to confession, learn what you did wrong, and try to do better. Not try, in this case, do better. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I think, like you said, bringing everything that you can to the light. So stop trying to hide things. Stop trying to. And I honestly do think when you're looking at people's intentions nowadays, we are removed by decades from the situation. Not that that's any better, but those people now that are involved are trying to get records to light. They are trying to bring the horrors to the light so that people can see, understand, and not allow it to ever happen again. Really, learn from our mistake. I don't even want to say mistake because it almost seems like it's pushing it off as oops, you know what I mean? But learn from the horrors of our history.
So let's learn about what the situation was, right? So the former Kamloops residential school, obviously in BC. So as far as we know, with the information that we have, this was a residential school that the Catholic Church ran and I think closed in the 1960s. The government of Canada took it over for I think another 10 years. And the problem here, so many problems, but one of the ones that highlighted for me was that there's only 50 or so documented deaths at this residential school. And then just a week or so ago, it was discovered through this radar technology that there was 215 bodies of children. Children. Yeah. I mean, it's sick. Right?
Now, do we know, like, so when I'm reading into it and I'm hearing a lot of social media posts and everything else, I'm seeing, oh, they murdered these kids because they couldn't take care of them or whatever the case may be. I'm taking it as they were beaten to death or they were, do we know what happened there in that case?
The problem, I think, is that there's a lack of information, that there's a lack of documentation around. So, as Father said, that you have 215 unmarked graves. Yeah. Again, social media are saying something that like it's a mass grave. That's not the case. But they're unmarked, and people are responding. They're kind of horrified and shocked, and they should be. Because like something like this, reading with this, especially when you're talking about children, like this should offend our sensibilities. This should shock us, and not just in a general way. Like this should shock our Catholic sensibilities. Like just the fact that there are 215 children that within a Catholic institution that were buried in an undocumented way and with unmarked graves. We did a podcast a few months ago about Catholic funerals and the importance of names, of saying the prayers for someone's passage. That this was done and seemingly based on the information that we have in this kind of callous and cold and kind of removed way, in a way that didn't recognize the dignity of those children. That's a problem, or that's something that we should.
I remember our bishop in our diocese, Thomas Dowd, released a statement this past week, and I thought it was very personable, from his heart. But that's kind of what he mentions in his statement. It's like, he goes, number one, just the fact that these children died is one thing, as horrible, very horrible and unnecessary. But the fact that we needed to use radar technology to find their remains is even more awful, or I don't know what I'm just paraphrasing here what he said.
Deplorable.
Because he's deployed. Yeah, he goes he says the dead are not meant to be anonymous or forgotten. Yeah. So, and I thought that was a great point, and I've been reflecting a lot about that. Right, that they were just anonymously sort of placed here goes against our Catholic fiber. When someone dies, we have a funeral mass for them, and we make connections between the life here and life in eternity, and we remember people, right? You go to the cemetery. I visit my loved ones and people that have been part of my life at the cemetery. Their name is there. Sometimes a picture.
All Souls Day, we had remember the what was it called, the
memorial?
Yeah, but we Pope Francis gave us the week or 2 weeks to go visit at the cemetery.
Indulgences to go and pray for the dead. So it goes right against everything about us, right? Let's just.
Is that where people think that maybe that these murders were done in a malicious way, or in a that's where I was just stuck on the fact that I thought they were murdered, but it could be that the fact that they could have died, unfortunately, but they could have died from disease or some other things too. We just don't know, right? But it seems like the fact that they're unmarked and hidden is the problem. It's like we don't know. We have no idea what's going on here. It could look suspicious. It can look. So.
Media reports are saying that some of these students have died from disease. Tuberculosis spread, famine,
from trying to run away from the schools.
Some died by trying to escape, and the elements. Some may have been killed. I don't know. Like Matt said, we don't have all the information, right? And that's why it's important that these things do come to the light, so we
can actually talk about them.
The full story. But residential schools in general are such a dark part of our Canadian history. So let's,
So what happened? Why did all of a sudden there was residential schools? Did the missionaries just come in and then just say, okay, we're stealing your kids? It's like, how did it start? How is it, if we're going to talk about residential schools, what happened?
Yeah, so I would say that people have ideas about residential schools, and people tend to paint with kind of broad strokes about them. That we want to say that like the church was involved, that it wasn't a purely kind of Catholic Church initiative, that it was a collaborative effort between the government of Canada, the Catholic Church, and other church denominations. But for the most part, the kind of the resources that the people actually implementing or administrating and running the schools themselves were Catholic people. Whether or not it was like you say missionaries coming in and starting residential schools, it wasn't as kind of simple as that. It was straightforward. But we can also one of the things that should kind of send up alarm bells, or should kind of be a bit shocking for us, is how closely aligned the efforts of the church within residential schools were aligned to a kind of colonialism, that were participating in an agenda, which, whether that was the government's, whether that was part of the kind of missionary attitude of those people at the time, that it was an attempt to displace culture. It was an attempt to, and we see kind of evidence brought to light this week that like diminish the dignity of the individual souls of the people that they were claiming to be kind of helping. And that I think, Father, in your homily this past Sunday, you said it really well, that like a lot of things are sometimes things that are done by Catholic people, and sometimes in the name of Catholicism, are very far removed from what Christ himself would have us do.
And remember the reality of the residential schools. So it was law in Canada from the Indian Act of 1894 that it was mandatory for children to go to these residential schools, right? And basically, they were sort of forced. They were forcibly removed from their families. They were put into these schools, and I know before we went on the air, you used the word brainwashed. Right? They were sort of forced
evangelized.
Yes,
forced evangelized.
You used the word brainwash, which and the resources, whether they were from the people running the schools or the government themselves, were not much. So a lot of people were malnourished and not treated well. They were beaten, sexually abused,
psychologically
abused. I've been reading a lot of personal stories from people in our community. I've been talking to some elders in our community this past week, and people sharing stories of how they were treated. I saw a picture of an elder with at this residential school with this Catholic sister behind him. The picture looked friendly. They were just posing for a picture, but still, like, it was just eerie to see that. So there was a lot of horrible things that, not when they spoke their language, they were beaten, and
of course,
you're going to speak all these things. So it's a
those are the things that we hear about, right? Which is so unfortunate. And then, it's just a dark area.
And we found remains of 250 people at Kamloops. I don't doubt that we're going to find
potentially
more remains potentially at other residential schools across Canada. Right. But like, what was the result of these young people attending these schools? When you suffer trauma like this, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological torment, and all this stuff, like, you leave those schools different.
For sure.
And this is part of the suffering of our Indigenous brothers and sisters
nowadays. For sure. I think. Now, okay. So was it then people that, was it the church that ordered it? Was it orders? Was it who? Was it the Pope that said we need to go to Canada and start these schools up, or was it like how did that kind of come to be? So,
no, So you mentioned the Indian Act, that it was primarily a government initiative, but the church had the resources and the
motive.
And it's hard to say, because you would say like the infrastructure for education, which
Yeah,
is that much more disturbing. That this was done in the name of education.
Yeah.
That is like, as you know, us at this table, some of us are educators, and
Yeah.
we're like, no, and if you're like, if you study kind of the history of pedagogy and like how that it's as an educator, you want to be as far removed from that idea that you're brainwashing a group of people, that you're just kind of imposing on them, you know, pushing out all of their knowledge and inserting all of your knowledge. You like, you know, modern.
You want to shepherd them.
Giving people the tools to actually, you know, acquire their own knowledge. And so this branding what was done in residential schools as education is kind of an insult to education, and all the more nefarious that this colonial agenda was kind of advanced through the sort of guise of education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we had, for those of you listening or watching on YouTube, what I'm saying right now might sound out of place because obviously I'm assuming in editing later that we've closed the gap, but we just had a fire alarm go off in our church, which stopped our conversation. The fire trucks came.
About 2 hours. Maybe an hour, 2 hours?
It was about an hour or so. And nothing serious. The church is fine. As you can tell, we're back in the church, for those of you watching on video. It is a hot day today, and the fire alarm went off. But they give us a clear to continue, right? The fire department gave us a release to continue. So I'm just explaining this, not because it did surprise us and we had to stop our production, but in case we lost ourselves here and have to maybe we repeat something we've already said in the first half of the episode. But we were Matt, you were making a great point about the fact that some of these the fact that some of this stuff was made in the name of educating people was horrible. I want to move, though, to reactions, okay? Mm-hmm. Because all across Canada and a lot of parts of the world, there's been a lot of reaction over this in the last week or so. So obviously, our Indigenous brothers and sisters, are reacting one way,
and rightfully so,
and maybe reliving hurt and trauma. And I've really been, I honestly must say, I've been blessed to hear their stories in the past week, and it's really brought my heart closer to them, by hearing their story. Then there's Canadians in general reacting at the horror of what happened. Catholics are reacting, as maybe taking on part of the shame that our church was involved with something like this. So on all levels, there's lots of reaction. So of course, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops have released a statement, about this issue. Many bishops across Canada have released a statement. Many of them apologizing to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. The Prime Minister of Canada, just a few days ago, has called on the Catholic Church to accept responsibility and to participate in the process of investigation, releasing documents. They're demanding an apology from Pope Francis, which was part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission from a number of years ago. So there's some reactions there, and of course, in this day and age, Matt, your favorite thing is people obviously reacting online.
And I think for our part, or what we can kind of, the way that we can participate in the conversation is to really kind of navigate between kind of the extreme reactions that people have, like on both sides. That we want to say that some people's instinct is to jump up and defend the church and like, oh no, this couldn't have happened, or like, and especially since we don't have a lot of information at this point. The records aren't. They're working to gather the records. The Oblates of Mary, the sisters or the order that was involved
in that school.
They're working to acquire the records. So like until we have more information, people are responding based on their own kind of instincts or their own kind of loyalties. So. And then on the other hand, you have kind of misrepresentation on the other side, saying that this was the case across the board. And like, while we do want to be kind of realistic and really sympathize with the harm that was done.
Yeah. Not defend it ever.
Yeah, we need to be clear in our communications. We need to be not so quick to defend our own interests or our own kind of identity, and really let the truth come out and have.
And that's the hard part. I mean, with social media, that's the hardest part, because you are hearing all of these different things. For instance, I mean, one of the misrepresentations, I thought that when it said that they found the bodies of 215, it was in a mass grave, that they were all killed to hide some shameful secrets, and like that's the stuff that gets out there. That's not what we know. That's not what we know to be true. That's not what we know to be false either. But they're like you said, that they're individual unmarked graves. So it wasn't a mass grave that they just tried to like burn down a school and hide it. But it wasn't innocent, right? I mean, there was problems here. It wasn't. Coming and shedding light on the truth of the facts that we actually know. Yeah. And so what are some of those? I mean, so Stephen Harper came out and apologized on behalf of Canada back in when this first kind of started coming to light and started the reconciliation.
2009, I believe.
2009. So he came out at that time and apologized on behalf of Canada. Pope Benedict at that time mentioned that it was like this was a horrible thing done. That this was so why is it that the Pope, speaking, like the bishops all have come out and apologized, why hasn't the Pope apologized on behalf of the Catholic Church? Why isn't that something that needs to be done or said? Or why hasn't the Pope just done it? Or, is it something that...
Yeah, let's look at both sides of that, because people are demanding an apology from the Pope, and on one side, and even I think we would agree. On one side, people are saying like, why not? Why won't he just apologize? Yeah. And sometimes I feel that way as well. Yeah. Me personally, so why won't he just say that, he's sorry? And rightfully so. People have that thought. Why is the church using words like we're expressing sorrow and we're doing all these things? And on the other side, what the Pope seems to be saying, he released. He didn't release a statement like people are doing, but he spoke about it at his Angelus this past Sunday. Mm-hmm. And he said how close he was to the Canadian people, how he it was deplorable that there was, like you had mentioned that earlier, about, sort of this colonial attitude, and sort of a wake-up call that shouldn't be happening anywhere in the world. And
the Catholic Church didn't condone it. Right?
Exactly. And he led a moment of silent prayer, which is very powerful. He asked everyone in the St. Peter's Square there gathered together to pause in silent prayer for the victims of these residential schools in Canada. But so, on one hand, in the Catholic news, you had, headlines like Pope calls for reconciliation and healing over residential school discoveries. So the Catholic media was sort of saying Pope Francis expresses sorrow after the graves found, and then I moved to like CTV news where it's
CBC
like
or whatever.
Pope mentions what was the headline? Pope mentions the fact that this happened, but did not apologize. And so you see that on both sides. People are saying why won't he just apologize and all this stuff. And I think, and please, like I've already said, what's wrong with Pope apologizing? But what they're trying to do is that the church is structured in such a way that the Pope is kind of saying, like, this happened in Canada, in certain places, and the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops has to respond to this. And the bishops responsible for the diocese where these places took place are called to respond to this too.
They're the legal authorities in those areas.
They're the legal authority.
It's not the Pope. The Pope isn't the legal. Pope has no say in Canada over. We're talking about this is a totally different conversation. But the German churches and everything else, the way it's structured in Canada, the bishop is in charge of the Catholicism, the name Catholic
in his territory.
In his territory. Yeah. If he wanted to, and someone put Catholic Food Center, he could go up and take the name Catholic off that food center if he wanted to, because he owns the right to the Catholic name and the Catholic Church, and so the corporation that he is the sole owner of in his diocese, he has that. So his apology is the topmost legal authority in the area that could. Now, I agree with you that maybe the bishops as a whole should apologize on one, because then you have all the Catholic bishops. But the bishops in the areas have apologized, right? Am I right?
Lots of bishops across Canada have apologized. Yes, for sure.
And we can hope as well that more will be said and more as we have more information.
Yes, exactly.
And a true apology can't come forward until all the truth has come to light. We talked a little bit about that. So if we apologize for if Kamloops bishop, let's say, apologized for the residential schools,
which he did,
but let's say before this, and then they discovered all these unmarked graves and all that stuff. Of course, the full truth wasn't to light at that point. Mm-hmm. Not that he wouldn't have anything to know about that,
right.
but he can come forward and apologize again. Yeah. Right, like that makes sense to me, that he would, as the whole story becomes known, you apologize, get the full story out there, get all the truth out there.
And I remember, I know I talk about John Paul II a lot because I love him very much, but Pope John Paul II came to Canada in 1984 for his visit, and wanted to meet with the Indigenous people as well while he was visiting Canada. And something happened in the schedule. I think there was weather issues where the plane couldn't get to Nunavut or whatever it was at the time. Now we know it's Nunavut. And so that was moved off the agenda. Well, then he visited, and he promised the people, I will be back to meet with you. And he promised them that, and in 1987, 3 years later, he was visiting the United States, extended his trip by a day to go visit the Indigenous peoples in Canada. And he just came to Canada for a day to meet with the Indigenous people. Beautiful reconciliation happened. And Pope John Paul II just has this warmth about him that you could sense. Even I was looking back at pictures of it this past week, and you sense of the unity between the Indigenous peoples and the Pope. Then you mentioned Pope Benedict in 2009, sort of saying that it was deplorable of what happened, and so Pope Francis, in 2018 has said sort of what we were talking about with the structure, like the bishops of Canada. An apology from them is an apology from the church. Yeah. That's what he's saying. Yeah. Would it hurt for Pope Francis to apologize?
No.
So I don't know. People that's what people are wrestling with right now. And if I
was going to say, if I look at this from a parent point of view, I have kids that are this awful thing happened, and now we're trying to figure out how to get past it with people, individuals. Even if I was in my business, same kind of thing with employees and everything else. Look at it from a case of, so how do we move forward? How can we move forward? Obviously, get the truth out there. Get all the truth out there. We had somebody have a great, amazing idea. What if the church, what are the suggestions that we can? If we had every single bishop and then the Pope apologize and say sorry, is that the end of it? Because that doesn't seem right.
Of course not. An apology would be the beginning of it. And why I mentioned John Paul II was because it would be a beautiful thing for Pope Francis, for example. I mean,
just to show up
to come to Canada and show his closeness to the Indigenous peoples of Canada as well. I mean, that would be a beautiful thing because Pope John Paul II did it, and it was such a beautiful thing, right? But you're right. An apology is not what we need. Apology is a start to a journey of reconciliation and healing.
That's right. And so where does that come? I mean, a really smart person told me just before this episode started again, after the fire alarm, that what if the church was to pay for a scan, like the sonar scan that was done around Kamloops? What if they were to pay around all that? Those are
concrete things that the church can do to
actually
say, we're helping here to make we're sorry, we're showing we're sorry. Right?
Yeah.
So let's
we're sorry for these individuals.
Let's scan all residential schools that were under the guise of under the control of the Catholic Church. Let's scan them all and pay for it and let's
get the truth out there.
Let's get the truth out there.
Let's
deal with. We started this episode I think 3 hours ago before the fire came. It was like when things come to the light, we can begin to heal. We can begin to move forward. So yes, the church should be involved in some of the process. And I honestly, from a local level, I really I know I've mentioned Bishop Dowd's statement here, but I could see it in his heart as a bishop of this diocese that he wants to be part of the reconciliation. Yeah. And I see it in the priests that I've talked to this past week, that they want to be part of the reconciliation. And I see it in Catholics, even the ones who are expressing their anger and hurt right now, I see it in their heart. They want to be part of the reconciliation. You know, so like what, and I had a beautiful opportunity late last week to sit down with a group of teachers and talk about this with them, and some of them expressed their anger and hurt, and and the Indigenous graduation coach of the school spoke up, an Indigenous man himself, and spoke beautifully, and he said, the fact that you're sad and feeling shame right now is appreciated. Yeah. He goes, but you don't really have to. He goes, you didn't do these things, so you don't have to feel shame about it because you didn't do it. He goes, but the fact that you're here, the fact that you're listening, and the fact that you're willing to learn about residential schools and do something now about it shows your willingness to journey with Indigenous people in reconciliation. And I've said it lots last week. I said it to you last night on the phone and all these things. But when the sexual abuse crisis happened in the church, it was awful. We're still feeling the effects of that, right? But what happened there, when light came to that situation, it brought about a societal change. Yeah. Now, all of a sudden, the church's wounds brought a societal change where everyone needs police records checks. No one can be alone with a young person. Every company has safe environment policies. You name it, that brought about a change in society. So, through the wounds of the church in this situation, that's my hope. Yeah. We're going to bring a change in society where we learn from the past. We hate that part of our history, but we're making a change in its society that we're going to love our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We're going to live with them and journey with them and heal with them.
Exactly. I think that's perfect. Like my thought is, there's nothing that we can do as a Catholic laity today or Catholic people today other than listen, I want to you tell me how we can make this better. Yeah. This happened. I wasn't a part of it, but I love my Catholic faith. That's a shameful part of history, and it's not what the church teaches so much, right? So what can I do now as a Catholic? How can I support you? How can we come together as that? But again, I think, we were talking about before, we can't be the ones. I can't be the one to put on necessarily a service to remember these people, because that doesn't mean it. I wasn't a part of it. I wasn't. Sure, but I can support the Indigenous community in doing that. You know what I mean? I can show up and be a part and show my support, and I can be. And if they ask, if they were to ask, I think the Catholic Church, then yes, let's step forward and do that if that's going to make it better. But I don't think. I mean, maybe it will. Maybe they have to tell us. Again, I'm a white guy talking about this thing, but they have to give us. Hopefully, if they're willing to. We gotta let them know we're willing to listen. We're willing to move forward. You need to help us. You need to help us understand, learn from this, and give us what you think we need to do as in a fellowship with you to move on. Yeah. And so that, like you said, societal change can happen, and that we never forget, right? So we can never go back to that place again. But remember. And understand the how to be better. If
there are Catholics at home saying, "What can I do?" That's what I would say. People say prayer isn't enough, but prayer is the beginning of things to open our hearts and minds to the movement of the Holy Spirit to guide us in the right direction. So first, I would say pray. Yeah. Second, I would say listen to the people who have suffered these atrocities. That's right. Learn about the residential schools, and that's how we'll find. That's how more truth. Let's share truth about what's happened, and let's walk together. Whether we're Catholic or Indigenous or Anglican or whatever, walk together as Canadians to put this dark piece of our life past us and begin to move forward together. This has been very difficult. It's a heavy episode to talk about. I'm so glad, though, that we did now, looking back. I do. And like we were saying before, nothing we say is going to be perfect. But to begin conversation, to talk about it, to bring light to the situation was our goal. So I think anybody listening hopefully knows where our hearts are at. Yeah. And knows, I'm sure you can pick apart what we've said, but knowing where our hearts are at and knowing what we want to have happen in this, what three white dudes sitting behind a camera can expect, So let us,
keep us accountable, but keep us honest, keep us truthful. And I think part of the Catholic Buzz is talking about it, getting the discussion
having
moving,
conversations.
having conversation.
We're starting the conversation, so we invite people to send your feedback. If you have anything to add to this, this won't be the end of our conversation here. We'll continue this in new and different ways. And send us an email at thecatholicbuzzpodcast@gmail.com. For Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you on the next episode of The Catholic Buzz.
Well, good thing we're not filming.